sports, your performance is everything. So what happens when our minds end up impacting our performance? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mindful Sports Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Mindful Sports. Following up on our last episode when we talked about Naomi Osaka and mental health and her decision to drop out of the tournament that she was playing in at the time, it brings a few questions that I wanted to take a look at because this is something that can cause confusion for some people. And that is, if she was dealing with mental health issues, why did she not have a sports psychologist to help her get through those? And it's a great question because you sit here and you think of sports psychology and a sports psychologist, and it might make you wonder, what exactly is their role in taking care of these athletes? Well, that's the thing, is their role in taking care of athletes is actually on the mental performance side of it. Now, there are some who may also be able and licensed to do therapy as well, but the therapy, the dealing with the anxiety and depression and other mental health issues, is not specifically the role of a sports psychologist. Their focus is on overcoming some of these in terms of performance. It is the how do we deal with our anxiety in the moment? How do we prepare for our anxiety? Whereas someone with mental health training is someone who is, okay, why are we having this anxiety? What can we do about this anxiety in total? So these are two very interconnected realms, but also two very distinct and separate realms as well. And in Naomi's case, and in many athletes' case, their focus is the on-the-field performance. It's not to fix the anxiety. It's not to fix the issues that come up. It's simply, how do we handle them to increase our performance? And that's a very important role for athletes. But that also often means that athletes who are getting help from a sports psychologist are also going to end up being referred to another place. Because many times in the work of increasing our performance, we're going to come across mental health issues that go beyond the scope of what a sports psychologist does. But they're going to be the ones uncovering that in the process of getting their athletes to optimal performance. Now, in Naomi's case, if she had a sports psychologist working with her, that would have been the, how do I still do these interviews? How do I still participate in this tournament and be at my best performance level? Sometimes this is going to be a lot for an athlete to try and get through. And there are going to be times where you're not necessarily going to be able to just fight through or to use the techniques. You may need to take that step back like Naomi did. And that is okay. The downside for athletes is when they have to do that, when they have to step away to take care of something, they are risking an awful lot by doing so. Now, in Naomi's case, it could have turned out great, and it really did turn out fairly well for her. Yes, there were numerous people criticizing her for how she handled it. And yes, she does deserve some criticism for that. She did not handle the situation in the most professional way. But can we also extend a little bit of grace given the fact that she was dealing with these other issues, and these other issues were the reason why she was taking that time out? We've said before, it's okay to not be okay. And this was the case for Naomi. She wasn't okay at that time. And that needs to be okay. In sports, we put way too much pressure on athletes to deal with things on their own, to feel like they have to have these things dealt with on their own, that they are responsible for doing it. And there is some truth to, you have to be responsible for your own performance. But there's also truth in that, as we talked about last time, these athletes are human, guys. They're just humans. They're gonna have bad days. They're gonna make mistakes. And just because we expect them to be on a specific level does not mean that they should have to be at that level 24/7. Athletes today have very little time to themselves. If they're not playing, they're practicing. If they're not practicing, they're probably doing some media. If they're not doing some media, they're probably trying to live their life and being surrounded by other people and fans everywhere they go who want something from the athletes. They want autographs, they want pictures, they want time, they want to ask questions. So we expect them to be on this professional level at all times. And as we've started to see with many athletes, this is just something that is not going to be sustainable in the long run. Now, some of you might want to sit here and say, well, what about these past decades of athletes? They were able to handle it. They didn't have it quite to the extent that today's athletes do. You could read paper, you could hear a news article or a radio edit, but they didn't have the 24/7, always accessible, we're going to get a hold of you. They didn't have the social media pressures on top of everything else. They didn't have as much of a society that is so ingrained and divided on athletes as they were. This takes a toll. We're putting and asking our athletes to take on more and more pressure and responsibility with the same and sometimes even less help than what they had before. After this short break, we'll come back and we'll jump right into the next segment, and we'll look at what are some things that we can do to help our athletes navigate these added challenges. Welcome back, everybody. So we talked a little bit about the difference between sports psychologists and therapists. And we also talked a little bit about how our athletes are having to deal with more pressure than what they have before. And one of the things that I know we've talked about before is the stigma around mental health in sports and with athletes. If we're looking for a place to start for helping our athletes, I think it needs to start there. Yes, we could say that we should require them to do less media, more time off. Maybe it's we need to change our societal expectations. Just because you see a famous person, whether it be an athlete, an actor, doesn't mean that you have to go be involved with that person right then and there. Doesn't mean that it's the appropriate time. The majority of people might get that. But you have those few extremes that go a little bit overboard, trying to get their way. But really, for athletes, I think it has to start at home. It has to start with your brothers and sisters on the field. It has to start with the coach and your organizational hierarchy and management. These are the people who have to be the ones that are making the decisions, that have the say on what our athletes are doing and how our athletes are taken care of. You know, a grand majority of athletes, like we saw with Naomi, will come out and support their fellow athletes for getting help. Congratulations, way to go. That's awesome. I'm proud of you. That's something that needs to be done. Ask them how many of them would be open about saying the same thing about themselves. Ask them how many of them would think that they would get the same support. Unfortunately, due to multiple different studies that have been done on this across more industries than just sports, we find that people are more willing to support and be proactive in getting help for others around them. And they don't see it as a negative. But when it comes to them specifically, now all of the stereotypes, the pressures, the negativity start weighing down on that person and prevent them from getting help for themselves. And that's why I think that this is where it needs to start, is in the locker rooms, on the field, from organizations. Over the last few years, we've started to see sports organizations that are looking at sports psychologists, that are bringing in people to find and help athletes increase their mental performance, to help them perform better on the field. But what have we done to break down the negative stereotypes and stigmas that hurt athletes' mental health? What have we done? We sit here and we say, oh yeah, it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. We advocate, hey, we need our athletes to be getting mental health support and resources. We say a lot of things. We occasionally will do something. But too many of our athletes still struggle with this issue on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly, on a yearly basis. These things are hard to overcome. But remember, sports organizations are getting sports psychologists, right? And that is the difference that we talked about. They're getting sports psychologists. They're looking for ways to improve the performance of the athletes, but not to address the issues that are underlying that. I think of athletes, prominent athletes, athletes that were stars in the spotlight that have ended up losing their battles. Have ended up not being able to overcome because they didn't get the help that they needed. And I understand as an athlete that can be hard to do, because there are still so many negatives that come with it. There are still so many stereotypes that are ingrained into sports culture that is where we need to start. The other things we do, they're great. They're something. But are they effective? We've been doing them for how long? And what results have we seen? What things have we seen change? I know we think of our athletes as entitled and privileged and divas because they make all this money, and yet here they are complaining about something. Here they are not living up to what they're supposed to be. Here they are, 80% of athletes going broke within 5 years of retirement. Because they don't get the help that they need. Because they don't have people in their corner. Because they don't know better. Maybe they do have people in their corner. Maybe they have all the right support systems. Maybe it's their own mental block that keeps them from taking that next step, that keeps them from moving forward, that keeps them from implementing what they know that they should be doing. They know that they need help, but they don't get it. They don't reach out for it. Guys, mental health is such a big issue for athletes. And those negative reinforcements that we see all the time, the backlash that Naomi received, not because of how she handled it, but because she didn't have the mental fortitude to make it. Guys, all those do is continue to hurt athletes. All those do is continue to ingrain those negative stereotypes. Encourage athletes to reach out. Praise athletes for reaching out. Yeah, sometimes it's going to seem a little bit like you're pandering to them, because they're grown adults. They should be doing this already. But that's what they need to help overcome many of these other barriers. We'll take one more short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about how a sports psychologist and a therapist could work together to overcome these issues and to get these athletes the help that they deserve and the help that they need. Welcome back, guys. So we talked a little bit about the differences in our first segment between a sports psychologist and a therapist. We talked a little bit about how athletes are dealing with mental health. And we talked about some changes that might need to be made. And it's hard to give specifics in some cases because mental health is a very personal issue. Casting a broad net, you might catch a couple, but you might also miss a bunch. Because not everybody's going to go for it. Not everybody's the same size. Not everybody needs the same help, the same approach. So when we look at this increase of bringing sports psychologists in, bringing people in to help with the performance aspect, what can we do? What can they do to work with a therapist, to work with athletes, to overcome these issues? Because a sports psychologist will uncover a lot of them. As you're working through giving tips, trying to understand how the athlete functions, what their motivations are, you're probably guaranteed most of the time to uncover something, to find something that's a little bit beyond the scope of a typical sports psychologist. So what can a sports psychologist do in that case? The best thing they can do is send them over to somebody who is trained for that, who is licensed to be a counselor, to be a therapist. Unfortunately, this can often lead to a disconnect. It can lead to this happens here, that happens there. And the two paths can miss each other. Part of the struggle for this is the ethics that both a sports psychologist and a counselor have to adhere to, have to follow, that lead them to not being able to share information back and forth. And I think that this could be an even scarier proposition for athletes. To make the sports psychologist somebody who can know what's going on. Maybe the sports psychologist doesn't want to know what's going on because that's outside their realm. And what good will that information do them? I could give you some specifics. The downside on the athletes is that means more people are going to know about it. More people might hear about it. And I think the biggest thing is that an athlete doesn't even have to do that, because they could tell the sports psychologist themselves what's going on. How are they feeling? Is this helping? Are they getting other tips from their therapist? But the whole revolution of this requires one major thing that is extremely difficult and risky for athletes, especially professional athletes. Trust. You have to be able to trust everyone that is involved. You have to be able to trust your therapist, that they're giving you the right things. You have to be able to trust your sports psychologist, that they're doing the right things. You have to be able to trust that these people aren't sharing sensitive information, that aren't sharing damaging information. Because that's one thing that makes this even harder, is when you're in a high profile collegiate space or professional space, and sometimes even in a high school space, you lose so much of that privacy that you should have. And you see things written and twisted about you all the time, and people put a spin on this, maybe to drum up more views and more drama, and they got this juicy information. And now you're putting more juicy information out there. Now somebody finds out you are seeing someone. They try some underhanded tactics, smooths their way in. Somebody accidentally lets something slip. A sports psychologist, an athlete, and a therapist have to be extremely close-knit for this trust and this relationship to build. And it has to stand strong. So we need outstanding ethical, moral therapists. We need outstanding ethical, moral sports psychologists. We need people that are willing to put their egos aside and work with what they have and work in the best interest of others and maintain high standards that surpass most other things and most other standards. I personally am starting in a program where I will be doing sport and performance psychology, and I will be specializing in clinical mental health counseling because I've seen this disconnect, and I want to find a way to overcome it. I want to find a way to say, you trust me, I've worked with you, I am working with you, and I will continue to work with you, and we are not just going to pass you off to someone else. That is my personal goal. And yeah, it'll probably be a little bit before I get there. Gotta get some things done first. There's some hoops to jump through for people that want to be licensed, for people that want to do these things. But it's worth it. And if you are a therapist, if you are a sports psychologist, build that relationship. Don't expect that relationship. Don't take that relationship for granted. If these athletes are being brave enough and comfortable enough and taking the chance to put their faith in you, you need to honor, respect, and deserve that. So that we don't end up with more of these athletes losing their battle. So that we can break down these stereotypes and these negative barriers for athletes to get help. Guys, it's okay to not be okay. Athletes are humans. Let's make sure we remember that and respect that. And think about how you can help the athlete in your life. Friend, family member, acquaintance, someone you know. How can you help them be okay with not being okay and getting the help that they need? I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you again next time.
Please be sure to hit that like button, share this with your friends and family, and leave us a comment down below. Thank you everybody for watching. To stay up to date, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Have a great day.